The silence began on a Tuesday in late August 2013. It wasn't a sudden, jarring silence, but a creeping one, a quiet that slithered through the Beckwith family home in Lander, Wyoming, and coiled in the corners like a storm about to break. Marianne Beckwith noticed it around dinner time as the shadows grew long outside the windows and the pot of chili on the stove simmered with no one there to eat it. She kept glancing at the old kitchen clock, the minute hand trembling its way toward 7. She'd made coffee, a ritual Garrett had insisted upon before every expedition, a way to stay anchored while he was in the wild. 7 p.m. came and went. The phone didn't ring. She stood at the window, the mug of untouched coffee cradled in both hands, and stared into the blue-gold dusk, willing it to blink and change. But the dusk didn't care. The mountain didn't care. Deep down, neither did the silence. Garrett Beckwith was not a man who forgot details. An engineer by trade and a climber by obsession, he built redundancies into every aspect of his life, backups to the backups. Their daughter Dela, 19, had inherited his sense of order, layered it with youth's gentle arrogance and the kind of fearlessness that makes people believe they are immortal. The two of them had left 4 days ago for Mount Hooker, their biggest father-daughter climb yet. Garrett had spoken of it for months, not just as a challenge, but as something sacred, a rite of passage. Granite, wind, and bond. They were supposed to check in Monday night from the satellite phone. That didn't happen. Garrett had said it might not. Weather, rockfall, signal issues. They'd try again Tuesday night. Marianne had waited patiently, convincing herself not to worry. But by the time the clock struck 8 on Tuesday, and the coffee had gone stone cold, her hand shook as she picked up the phone. No calls, no texts, no Garrett. By Wednesday morning, the silence had grown fangs. Marianne stood at the kitchen island, scrolling back to Dela's last message, sent from the trailhead, starting the approach. See you in a few days. Love you. There were no words since. No photos, no satellite ping, no anything. That afternoon, after pacing the living room until her feet ached and her breath grew shallow, she called the Fremont County Sheriff's Office deputy. Miles Corbin was the first responder assigned to the case by the time he reached the big sandy trailhead. Dusk was once again closing in. The road was a slow, grumbling stretch of gravel that seemed to carry him farther from the world. The Beckwith's green Ford F-150 sat in the dirt parking lot, motionless and powdered in a layer of pine dust. Yellow aspen leaves curled in its windshield grooves. A few hikers' cars were scattered nearby, but this one stood out in its silence, an emptiness that felt rehearsed. Corbin ran the plates. Garrett Beckwith. Just as Marianne had said, he approached the truck slowly, scanning. For signs of disturbance? Nothing. No broken glass. No forced entry. The doors were unlocked, typical for trailheads this remote. He opened the driver's side. Inside, everything was neatly placed. Folded maps, a half-used trail permit, a weathered Wind River Range guidebook. But the glove compartment held the detail that made Corbin freeze. 2 black satellite phones, fully charged, left behind. A crack of cold moved through Corbin's spine. The phones were the Beckwiths' only lifeline to the outside world, and they had walked into the range without them. Garrett, the man who packed duplicates of every climbing cam, who double-checked every knot, who made sure Dela had her own. The emergency locator had left them behind? Didn't make sense. It didn't fit anything Marianne had told him, or anything he could guess from Garrett's spotless planning reputation. This wasn't a case of overconfidence. It wasn't a missed turn. Something had gone wrong long before they ever clipped into a rope. Corbin keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Deputy Corbin. I've located the Beckwith vehicle. Trailhead verified. I've got 2 sat phones in the glove box. Pete, both phones are in the truck. The line buzzed for a beat. Copy that, Corbin. Sit tight. We're escalating to search and rescue. Nightfall, the dusty lot had transformed into the nucleus of a search operation. Maps were unrolled on truck hoods. Radios crackled with coordinates. Volunteers filtered in. Some rangers, some climbers from town, who knew Garrett personally. The wind picked up. crisp bite in the air signaled the change of seasons and the beginning of something grim. A helicopter launched before dawn. From the air, Mount Hooker was a maze of crags, shadowed gullies, and bare rock faces that shimmered with ice. It was a vertical cathedral, sacred, silent, and unforgiving. The rotors hummed like distant thunder as searchers scanned for gear. Tents, clothing, anything human. Nothing on the ground. Trained SAR teams combed the usual routes. Garrett had submitted a route plan, meticulously mapped, but even that felt incomplete now. He was known for seeking the challenge, the undocumented lines. They called his name into the wind. Garrett Dela. No answer. Not even an echo. Then the weather turned. A storm came fast, howling down from the peaks like a thing with teeth. Rain became sleet, then snow. Helicopters grounded. Rock turned slick and deadly. The SAR commander called a halt to the search. They'd lost 2 climbers. They couldn't afford to lose more in town. Marianne was already watching the national news pick up the story. Experienced father and teen daughter missing on Mount Hooker. For days, she endured the barrage, well-meaning. Friends, church groups, reporters calling for statements she didn't want to give. She avoided the internet. She didn't want to see the speculation, or worse, the silence. But she didn't stop hoping. Alistair Finch arrived 4 days later, a veteran climber with graying hair and calloused hands. He had known Garrett for 2 decades. They'd summited Denali together. He walked into the command tent, uninvited but welcome, and dropped a canvas bag of Garrett's old journals on the table. Garrett never climbed by the book, Alistair said, unrolling a map. You won't find him on the standard routes. He was chasing lines nobody else would touch. The SAR commander raised an eyebrow. So you're saying he went off route? I'm saying he went off map. That night, while the official operation hunkered down for the weather, Alistair's team, a loose group of local climbers who knew every granite inch of the Wind River Range, began their own search. They used Garrett's old notes to plot possible routes. Routes that didn't appear in any guidebook. Routes Garrett had once dreamed of but never attempted. 10 days later, the operation was suspended. The official search had found nothing. No rope, no gear, no evidence of a fall, or struggle or misstep. Just 2 satellite phones gathering dust in a truck that no longer seemed to belong to the living. For Marianne, the world stopped. The house froze in time, Bella's room untouched. Her jacket still hung by the door, Garrett's tools arranged. Perfectly in his garage workshop, waited for hands that would never return. She didn't move them. She didn't have the strength. But she didn't give up either. Over the next 3 years, life moved on for others. For Marianne, it looped. Coffee at 7, a stare at the clock, silence. In the town of Lander, the Beckwith story became a whisper. Something people talked about in hushed tones, a cautionary tale for climbers, a ghost story told on cold nights. And then in the summer of 2016, something changed. A backpacker stumbled off trail near a creek southeast of Mount Hooker and noticed a glint of metal in the water. Fished it out, a climbing nut, aluminum, high-end. He recognized the brand, a favorite among serious climbers, the make Garrett Beckwith had used. He brought it to the sheriff's office. The cold case. File was pulled from storage. The nut was examined. Compared to receipts, journal entries, notes from Alistair, it matched probably, were definitive. The nut was common. Its location made no sense. Miles from any route Garrett would have taken. It was another. Dead end. But it reopened the wound. Worse yet, a year later, a theory appeared on a forgotten online climbing forum. An anonymous user posted about Garrett's small business loan from the year before the trip. They suggested baselessly that he'd faked the disappearance to escape debt, that he'd harmed his daughter and vanished. The theory spread. A local blog ran it. The story twisted in public hands. Marianne was blindsided. She called the sheriff's office, trembling with fury. You know Garrett, you knew him. They assigned a detective to re-examine the file. He dug into Garrett's financials. The consultancy was solvent. The loan payments were up to date. The insurance policy was average. No assets had been liquidated. There was no reason to vanish, no motive. The report concluded plainly: financial motive unfounded. But the damage was done. The Beckwith story became a murkier thing. It's a good man, the careful father, stained by rumor. Years passed, the file gathered dust again, until the summer of 22-4. Two elite climbers, Chloe Vance and Ben Carter, set out to climb a little-known face on Mount Hooker. Not the classic routes. They weren't interested in those. They wanted something untouched, undocumented, something they could name. 3 days in, sun setting behind the peaks, Ben spotted a bolt hanger drilled into the rock, then another, then a line of them leading to a shadowed alcove on the cliff. They weren't on any route database. And they weren't new. They followed the traverse, curious and cautious, and found something none of them were prepared for. A portal edge suspended. In space, weather-beaten, a gray camp flapping in the wind, a coiled rope, a dry bag, and a red sleeping bag, still zip. Detective Isabella Rossi had never been to Mount Hooker. She knew it only through the map pinned to the cold case board. A sweeping sheet of topography where the Wind River Range unraveled in contour lines and silence. Garrett and Dela Beckwith had vanished from this spot 11 years ago. Their disappearance, once a wildfire of headlines and search grids, was now fossilized in files thick with old hopes and unfulfilled procedures. Until now, the call came in at 6:03 a.m. on a Monday. A voicemail from Fremont County Dispatch. She listened to it while still half asleep. Her phone pressed to her cheek in the motel room she rented month to month near the sheriff's office. Detective Rossi. We've had a 911 call come in from a climber, a Chloe Vance. Claims they discovered human remains on a portal edge about 3 days into a climb on Mount Hooker. GPS coordinates are coming through now. You're going to want to hear this. Rossi sat up straight. It wasn't the claim of human remains that jolted her. It was the phrase on a portal edge. It was too specific, too strange, and too familiar. She pulled the Beckwith case from archives within the hour. It had taken her weeks to read it the first time when she joined the cold case unit. Working her way through search logs, journal entries, and the maddening finality of that detail, 2 fully charged satellite phones, left untouched in the glove compartment of a dusty green Ford truck by mid-morning. She was in the war room, standing beside a high-resolution satellite image of the Hooker Massif. She had the GPS coordinates marked by Chloe Vance. The photo Chloe had texted, grainy but unmistakable, showed the portal edge, hanging like a forgotten ship from the cliff wall. A coiled rope, a weathered dry bag, and that red sleeping bag still zipped. Rossi looked at it and felt her breath catch. She had been 15 when the Beckwiths vanished. A teenager in Cheyenne, with no idea that one day she would inherit a mystery that had outlasted seasons and storms. The red bag in the image was faded, but whole, an artifact from a timeline that had long since closed for everyone else. She tapped the sleeping bag in the photo with her pen. Get me everything on portal. Recovery, she told the technician beside her. We're not treating this like a climbing accident, not yet. By noon, the command team had been assembled. A senior crime scene analyst from Laramie, 2 high-angle SAR operatives from the elite Jenny Lake climbing unit, and Dr. Eris Thorne, a forensic anthropologist who had worked skeletal recovery sites from avalanche victims to old frontier graves. The mission would not be simple. Its portalage meant a vertical crime scene, a suspended platform hanging hundreds, possibly thousands, of feet above the ground. No police tape, no simple access. Everything would have to be flown in, rigged, anchored, retrieved, and done without compromising the evidence. Rossi and the team were in the air by Tuesday morning. The chopper circled the granite wall in long, careful loops. The portal edge came into view like a relic from a dream, fabric tattered, straps fluttering. It looked impossibly delicate, like a spider's web spun from another time. Rossi used binoculars. The rope was coiled, the gear undisturbed. The sleeping bag bulged at the center, zipped to the chin. Rosie's stomach knotted. This wasn't a campsite, she said quietly. It was a grave. The next day, recovery began. The two SAR climbers were lowered first. They rappelled from fixed anchors placed above the site, carrying helmet cams and precision gear. Their radios buzzed with calm professionalism as they reached the ledge. Visual confirmed. Rope intact. Webbing degraded. Sleeping bag secured with accessory cord. Bag appears undisturbed. Confirmed secured. Rossi's voice crackled. Through the line. Yes, ma'am. Tied off at 2 points. One anchored it deliberately, not a hasty rig. The implication landed like a stone. Someone had secured the body, not just left it. The climbers documented everything. Not. Each carabiner. The weathering patterns on the gear. The orderliness of the setup was unsettling. Whoever had been here hadn't panicked. They had placed things with purpose. Inside the bag. Skeleton was intact. Clean, bleached, and heartbreakingly small. They recovered it with precision, wrapping the entire sleeping bag and its contents into a rigid rescue container. Dr. Thorne directed every step from a temporary ledge-based station down below, back at the base staging area. Beneath a crisp, August sky. The remains were examined in silence. Dental records were retrieved from the Beckwiths' longtime family dentist, Inlander. Within hours, Dr. Thorne confirmed what everyone suspected. The body on the ledge was Dela Beckwith. She had been 19, bright, ambitious. Her journal included in the case file. It contained drawings of the routes she wanted to climb, lists of future summits. She had wanted to be the first female climber to document new alpine lines across the continent, and now her final resting place had been a cliffside grave. Dr. Thorne made the discovery on the second day of analysis. The tibia in her right leg. Shattered. A spiral fracture, with evidence of severe displacement. Not just a break, a catastrophic injury, likely from a fall. She would have been completely immobile. This injury would have been immediately debilitating, Thorne told Rossi, holding the bone gently. She couldn't have walked, climbed, or even moved without screaming. The picture became painfully clear. Garrett had placed her there. He had built the camp on the only protected ledge he could find. He had zipped her into the sleeping bag, secured the bag to the frame to keep her safe, and left wearing his harness and taking only the most critical gear. He had gone for help, but Garrett had never come back now. After more than a decade, the case had shifted. One body had been found. One truth was now clear. Dela Beckwith had not died in a climbing accident and been abandoned. She had been protected carefully. Her father had not run. He had tried to save her, which left a single question burning like fire in Detective Rossi's mind. Where had Garrett gone? The search began again, not with the wide grids of 2013. This time, it was targeted. Surgical. Alistair Finch returned, older now, weathered by a decade of guilt. He met Rossi over the new map, spread wide on a folding table under the canvas. Tent near the trailhead? He would have gone down, Finch said, pointing to the steep gullies below the ledge. Not the safest route, but the fastest. If Dela was hurt that bad, he wouldn't have cared about difficulty, just speed. They sent in a small elite team. The new mission: trace Garrett's probable descent path, look for gear, bones, clothing, a sign. 2 days in, they found it. A rusted Peton, driven deep into a hairline crack about 500 feet below the portaledge site. Old-school gear, dated by style and weathering, the kind Garrett had used. Excitement swelled. If he had placed it during his descent, then he'd made it at least that far. The team fanned out. They combed the slopes and gully edges, looked beneath. Every boulder, inside every natural chute, but nothing else surfaced. No harness. No pack. No body. The Piton, like the climbing nut found years before, was just another orphaned clue in a wilderness that refused to give up the rest of the story. The search paused. Again, autumn came quickly. Snow capped the ridges within days. Helicopters were grounded again. The case returned to Rossi's desk, this time with half an answer. Dela Beckwith had died from her injury, left behind with care and love, not abandoned. Her father had tried to save her and vanished in the process. Rossi updated the case file. The new narrative was painful but logical, except for one maddening flaw. The same flaw that had haunted the case since 2013. Why were the satellite phones still in the truck? Why? It was the one part Garrett had never gotten wrong. He brought backup for his backups. He'd lectured friends about never hiking out of signal without a comms plan, yet both sat phones, fully charged, had been left. Behind in the glove compartment? Was it oversight? An accident? Or something more? Rossi didn't have the answer, but the mountain, silent as ever might. And then the break. 3 months later, came not from a detective or a climber or a family member, but from a wildlife biologist doctor. Marlon Estes, a researcher from the University of Wyoming, had been conducting a drone survey of bighorn sheep habitat in the more remote basins of the Wind River Range. One flight path took the drone over a desolate, cliff-ringed valley miles. East of Mount Hooker, no trails, no camps. No real reason for a human to be there. He was watching the live feed when he noticed a flash of color. A tattered shred of blue fabric caught on a bush below a cliff wall as he guided the drone lower. The resolution clarified the scene. Cloth, scattered bones, metal glinting beneath the dust. He marked the GPS, saved the footage, and made a call to the sheriff's office. Rossi was on a helicopter the next morning. They couldn't land. The basin was too jagged. Instead, they were lowered by longline into the basin. Wind howled. Snow flurried. The terrain was brutal. It took nearly an hour to navigate from the drop point to the site, and when they reached it, the scene was unmistakable. Bone fragments, tattered blue nylon. Gear shrapnel rusted and warped. A cliff base that seemed to stretch into the clouds above. It was likely Garrett had fallen, but this wasn't the descent route they had mapped. He had wandered, lost, or disoriented. Or both. Dr. Thorne began recovery. It was unclear if they'd get DNA from the degraded remains. Time, weather, and animals had done their worst. But as one technician sifted through the surrounding earth, something surfaced. A piece of titanium, bent, scratched, unique. A surgical jaw plate. Rossi froze. When? In the days following the burial, Garrett Beckwith moved through the world like a ghost wearing her own skin. The house on Pine Street, where Garrett and Dela once filled every room with motion and conversation, was now a vacuum of sound and scent. Garrett's jacket still hung by the door, its sleeves forever bent at the elbows. Dela's climbing shoes sat by the garage steps, their laces tied the way she always left them, double-knotted, meticulously looped. Marianne had touched none of it. Not even after the coroner's office called with the final recovery inventory. She'd said thank you, accepted the sealed envelope with trembling hands, and tucked it, unopened, into the drawer of the kitchen credenza. But now, it was morning, the first one after the funeral, and Marianne sitting with her untouched. Coffee understood something terrible and beautiful in equal measure. The limbo was over. There would be grief. There would be aching. But she no longer had to imagine them suffering or surviving alone on some forgotten ledge in the vast, blank miles of the Wind River Range. She knew now, and knowledge, no matter how cruel, carried a quiet kind of mercy. She placed her palm flat on the table over a worn trail map Garrett had once pinned under a magnet. The paper had yellowed, the roots still marked in his fine-tipped pen. A red X near the top, a summit they'd reached on their first anniversary. It made her breath catch. She closed her eyes, and then her fingers brushed something else. The thick manila envelope from the evidence return. Her heart gave a jolt. She pulled it out. Inside was a list. Itemized and sterile. Recovered from remains of Dela Beckwith. 1 red synthetic sleeping bag weathered. Intact 1 climbing harness size small. Petzl brand 1 blue dry bag containing 1 headlamp, 1 empty water reservoir, 1 torn packet of freeze-dried chicken tikka masala, 1 braided friendship. Bracelet yellow-purple, 1 hand-stitched. Leather journal unreadable from water damage recovered from remains of Garrett. Beckwith. Partial titanium jaw plate bone fragments, non-viable for DNA, shredded blue windbreaker mountain hardware. One steel carabiner, unidentifiable. Marking she stared at the bracelet for a long time. She remembered the day Dela had made it, the last summer of high school, a camp out by the river, music floating from the open doors of Garrett's truck. You're both, Dela had said, tying it on Garrett's wrist. Now it had come back to her, returned like a message in a bottle. Marianne closed the folder and stood up, wiping her eyes. The truth had returned, but something else had come with it too. A quiet, insistent whisper at the edges of her thoughts. The phones. The ones left behind. Why? Detective Isabella Rossi wasn't finished. Though the files were closed officially, she couldn't let go of that final question. She didn't believe in ghosts, but the Beckwith case clung to her like the dry scent of pine needles. After rain. Something about it refused to be resolved. She stared at the digital case wall in her office. Photos, timelines, topographical overlays. The discovery of Dela's remains. Garrett's fall site. The recovered gear. Everything made sense. Except the most basic decision of all. Why had Garrett left without the satellite phones? She'd read the inventory of the truck a dozen times. There was no sign of chaos. No break-in. No missing gear. Just 2 working charged sat phones sitting in the glove compartment. Unused. Had it been a mental lapse? A moment of distraction? Maybe. But she didn't buy it. Garrett was methodical. He didn't forget. Not when it came to gear. Not when it came to safety. She returned to the original interviews from 2013. Not Marianne's. The others. A name jumped out. David Karp, gas station attendant at the base of the access road. Damned. Had spoken briefly with Garrett and Dela the day before. They hiked in, recorded in a supplemental deputy log as a casual witness. Rossi looked up the location on a map. Shale Ridge General and Auto, still operating, still one of the last stops before the big sandy trailhead. She picked up her keys. David Karp was still there. Older now, slower, his beard trimmed down to salt and pepper. Stubble and his name stitched above the pocket of a red mechanic's shirt. He recognized the Beckwith name immediately. Yeah, he said, eyes narrowing slightly. I remember them. Rossi let him speak. They came in for gas, regular fill-up. I remember the girl Dela. She bought one of those apple cider drinks. We kept in the cooler. The dad, Garrett. He asked if we had any water filters for sale. David leaned on the counter, frowning, said his had a busted seal and he didn't trust it. We didn't have any that day. He laughed, said, always got a plan B. Rossi scribbled the detail. Then she asked, did he mention anything about leaving gear behind? Or planning to return to the truck? David thought a moment and shook his head. No, just said they were doing the Eastern Cirque route, maybe a variation on it. He seemed calm, focused, like someone who'd already run through every version of the trip in his head. And the phones? She asked. David tilted his head. No, but I'll tell you this. When he left, he patted his pockets and said, if we're back early, I'll call the wife from here. Rossi blinked. From the gas station? David nodded. We've got a landline. You know how it is. No bars up there. Sometimes hikers use it. Rossi's pulse quickened. What time was that? Late morning? 11 maybe? Day before the storm rolled in? She made notes. Dela's message had been sent shortly after that from the trailhead. So they had service there at least intermittently, but Garrett had intended to call. Home from the gas station if they got back early, not from the mountain. That wasn't a plan rooted in laziness. It was deliberate. He hadn't planned to use the sat phones. He'd left them on purpose. But why? That night, Rossi called Marianne. I'm sorry to ask, Rossi said, her voice low. But did Garrett ever express hesitation about the sat phones? Not technical issues? Ideological ones? There was a pause. Marianne's voice came slowly. Yes. She said, not about safety. He always said they were important. But what? He hated being watched. Or tracked. Even by satellite. He said it made the wilderness feel smaller. If you brought all the technology in with you, it wasn't really an escape. It was just a longer leash. Rossi let that sit in the silence. Then Marianne added, "Something else. A memory. Quiet. Almost missed." Garrett had a phrase, she said. When he was annoyed by people who overplanned or overpacked for backcountry trips, he'd say, "They're dragging the sidewalk up the mountain," meaning, they were trying to make the wild comfortable. Rossi stared at the satellite phone's photograph. 2 black devices. Unused. Unneeded. Unnecessary. Maybe it hadn't been a mistake. Maybe Garrett had decided, deliberately, to disconnect. To take Dela into the mountains the way he had once gone. In as a young man with gear? Yes. With training. But without the digital tether, maybe he had believed he didn't need it. Maybe. Deep down, that belief cost him everything. But there was one more thread. A small, almost forgotten detail, buried deep in the file. Under the 2016 update about the climbing nut found in the creek, there was a field note from an officer named Webb. He'd investigated the location a few miles southeast of Hooker and made a brief comment. Area contained signs of previous off-route camping. Charcoal found. Improvised fire ring, not recent. Rossi had overlooked it before, but now with the realization that Garrett may have chosen a more primitive route, it leaped off the page. If he had tried to descend not just quickly, but quietly, avoiding marked trails or frequent routes, maybe that detour had been deliberate, not accidental. She called Webb the next morning, retired now but sharp. He remembered the spot. Remote as hell, he said. I had to bushwhack for an hour to get there. Nothing official, no paths, no cairns. But someone had clearly camped there. Not recently, maybe years ago. Any gear? Rossi asked. Nope, just the fire ring. It's the fire ring and something carved into a birch nearby. A date and a name. Stopped. What name? Didn't write it down? But I remember thinking it was odd because it wasn't Beckwith. It was Delaney. Rossi blinked. Delaney. Yep, like a first name. She froze. Dela, short for Delaney. The fire ring, the detour, the carved tree. Someone, maybe Garrett, had passed that way. Maybe he'd paused there, maybe even left. A mark. But the mystery deepened. If Garrett had been trying to carve a new line down the mountain, to honor an older way of climbing, or to prove something to Dela, or himself, then this detour had been part of the plan. Not an accident, not a panic, a philosophy. And that philosophy had cost him his life 2 weeks later. Listened to the hush. The wind moved through the aspens like breath through an old lung. No trail signs, no sidewalk, just wilderness. And somewhere deep within it, even now, were thousands of untold stories. Some buried beneath snow, others beneath memory. But one thing was certain. Garrett Beckwith had not gotten lost by mistake. He had walked into the wild on purpose and found a silence he could never return from. The inbox was quiet for 3 days. Detective Isabella Rossi. Didn't expect much to change after the post-funeral lull, not in a case where both missing persons had been found. But grief has strange gravity, draws things inward before letting anything escape. On the 4th morning, something surfaced. A message in her department email with the subject line regarding Garrett Beckwith. It was from a man named Jonas Muir, a name Rossi didn't recognize. No law enforcement credentials. No media tags. No mountain rescue associations. But the message was short and oddly formal. Detective Rossi, I saw the recent news about the Beckwith discovery. I believe I encountered Garrett Beckwith once, in the Wind River Range prior to his disappearance. I did not come forward. At the time, because I wasn't sure what I saw, I am now. Underscore if you're willing, I'd like to speak in person. I live outside Jackson. J. Muir underscore Rossi read it 3 times before standing and pacing the room. A potential witness, 11 years late, and still, she couldn't ignore the detail in the tone. Something careful. Almost haunted. She picked up the phone and called. The voice that answered was older, but lucid. Soft-spoken. double quotes. Yes, this is Jonas. Mr. Muir, this is Detective Isabella Rossi, Fremont County Sheriff's Office. I received your email. I'd like to talk. There was a pause. Then come. You'll want to see the maps. Muir's cabin sat tucked against a pine ridge, 2 miles west of Wilson. Snow still clung to the shadowed roots of the trees, but summer's green had started pressing back through. The road was narrow, but well maintained. Neat split rails lined the gravel shoulders, and a solar-powered motion light clicked on as Rossi pulled up Jonas Muir. Answered the door in wool socks and a flannel shirt so faded it looked like it belonged to another decade. His face was lean, almost sharp, with that deep-lined pallor that comes from years spent outdoors in cold places. But it was his eyes that gave Rossi pause, alert, guilt-stained, and very, very tired. Inside the living room was more like a study. Stacks of climbing logs, topographical maps, annotated journals, and hand-drawn overlays of the Wind River Range covered nearly every surface. A massive wall map had red strings pinned across it like arteries. Muir didn't offer coffee, just motioned toward the table. "I've never spoken about this," he said. "Not to anyone." Rossi waited. In the late summer of 2013, I was 4 days into a solo loop west of Mount Hooker, off the known trail network. I was charting variations. For a backcountry guide, I never ended up publishing. He paused. On the 5th morning, I was cutting through a granite corridor above a glacial basin. Remote, steep, no trails. That's where I saw the man. Rossi's pen stilled. He was alone. Below me, maybe 50 yards. I had the high ground. He hadn't seen me. He was wearing dark gear, a harness. Moving fast, not careful. I thought maybe he was trying to descend without a route. "Did you speak to him?" Muir shook his head. "No, that's why I never told anyone. I didn't speak to him, didn't flag him down. I just watched. Describe him." Muir nodded slowly. Taller than me, maybe 6 feet. Lean. Moved like a climber. Efficient, not hesitant, but he looked, I don't know, off balance. Not drunk, but disoriented. From altitude? Could have been? Or exhaustion. He slipped once, caught himself. I remember thinking, he's lost. Rossi leaned forward. Could it have been Garrett Beckwith? Muir didn't answer immediately. Turned and retrieved a manila envelope from a desk drawer. Inside was a faded trail journal. He opened it to a page marked in red ink. There, sketched in pencil, was the granite corridor, the same topography later seen in drone footage from the biologist who helped find Garrett's remains. A basin, a cliff line, scribbled note, 722. Adam solo climber, male, below, west chute, odd gate, no pack. Why didn't you come forward in 2013? Muir looked out the window before answering. I wasn't sure what I saw. He didn't call for help. Didn't look injured. Just purposeful. I assumed he was bailing from a failed summit bid. Then the story broke a week later. Vanishing. The truck. The phones. He paused, and I felt sick. Because maybe he'd been trying to get help. Maybe if I'd shouted. Climbed down, done something, ... He trailed off. Rossi said nothing for a long while. Then, can I photograph this? She pointed to the sketch. He nodded. Take it. She did. It was one more sliver of the truth. Not a solution. Not a resurrection. But a face glimpsed one last time. Alive, moving, desperate. She filed it that night under unconfirmed but credible witness citing 8/2013. Back in Lander, Marianne Beckwith was sorting boxes. Not to move. Not yet, but to start moving. Garrett's tools. Adela's books. The detritus of a life that had ended too soon and too far from home. At the bottom of a filing drawer in the garage. She found something unexpected. A sealed plastic folder labeled Wilderness Redundancy Logs, 2002 to 2012. Inside were laminated checklists. Gear logs. Emergency protocols. Pages and pages of contingency plans. Garrett had documented every trip, not just routes, but philosophies. One page caught her eye. It was written in Garrett's handwriting, but dated only months before the Hooker climb. A new list. Different title. Delaney Expedition, Independence Philosophy Model beneath it. No digital nav. No SATCOM. No route blazes. Minimalist supply. Principal autonomy through awareness. Marianne felt her breath stop. This hadn't been a climb. It had been a statement, an experiment. Garrett had been trying something new. Teaching Dela to rely on intuition, map reading, elemental skills. A kind of return to form, or perhaps a break from the modern. He had deliberately left behind the technology. It hadn't been forgetfulness. It had been doctrine. She wasn't angry. Not exactly, just overwhelmed by the enormity of it. She closed the folder and slid it under her arm. The next morning, she sent it to Rossi. Subject line, "You were right. He left them on purpose." Rossi's hands trembled slightly as she read the list. No SATCOM. He had taught his daughter how to survive, how to read weather, tie knots, find water. But he'd also given her the burden of his belief that real survival required disconnection. And when it failed, when her legs shattered and he had to go for help, that choice doomed them both. Rossi stared at the itemized note, her jaw clenched. Dela had believed in him, followed his lead, trusted him with everything, and Garrett, in his love and his principles, had gambled on purity over precaution. She didn't know whether to admire it or condemn it. The weeks passed. The Beckwith file was formally archived. The cold case room marked. It closed, but the public had not forgotten. The story had spread again, not as scandal this time, but as legend. Climber and his daughter, suspended in the sky, lost in silence. Found years later because of a mistake and a miracle online. Forums buzzed with debate. Some called Garrett reckless. Others heroic, but the truth was more fragile than either label allowed. He was both and neither. In early September, Marianne held a memorial climb. Just a dozen people. Alistair Finch, Chloe and Ben, the climbers who had found Dela. Even Jonas Muir came quiet and watchful. They hiked halfway to the base of Mount Hooker, where the air thinned and the pine bent against the wind. There, on a stone shelf above the valley, Marianne placed 2 small stones, one for Garrett, one for Dela, each etched with a single word, gone. Loved. And then, for the first time in a decade, she breathed, not shallowly, not fearfully, but completely. The wind at the Mount Hooker base didn't whisper. It howled. Detective Isabella Rossi stood beside the helicopter, headset pressed to one ear, eyes fixed on the rising wall of stone before her. The granite face loomed above, pale and unwavering. A monument to both awe and amnesia. It had buried secrets before. And it still had one more. A week after Marianne's memorial climb, a local filmmaker had reached out. He wasn't a journalist, just a documentarian named Elliot Green, with a fascination for high-altitude cold cases. He'd been following the Beckwith mystery for years. Now, after the recovery, he wanted to tell the story from the inside, ethically, quietly. No ratings circus, no invasive camera crews, just interviews records. The people who knew Garrett and Dela Rossi was hesitant, but something about Elliot's approach disarmed her. He wasn't obsessed with death. He was obsessed with what was left behind. "We preserve climbs and route books," he told her during their first phone call. "But we forget the people. This story isn't just about how they died. It's about why we keep going up, knowing we might not come back." Rossi agreed to meet. They sat at a table in a cafe in Lander. She brought a box of photocopied notes, Garrett's redundancy plans, maps, gear manifests, even pages from Dela's old trail journal. Elliot was quiet as he read. She trusted him completely, he said at one point, even when the system failed. She never thought it would fail, Rossi said. That's the problem with perfectionists. They're convincing. Elliot asked for permission to interview Marianne. Rossi warned him. She's not someone who wants to be interpreted. Don't try to make her tragic. I won't. He said. She's already complete. Marianne met with Elliot 2 weeks later. They sat on her back porch while the wind tossed cottonwood leaves across the lawn. She poured coffee. answered questions, refused others. And finally, after nearly 2 hours of quiet talk, she said something that Elliot later wrote down word for word. People want to know what went wrong, but sometimes nothing goes wrong. It just gets hard, and someone slips, or gets hurt, or makes one decision they never meant to matter that much. And that's it. That's the crack the world breaks open through. Elliot stared at her, awestruck. She smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It doesn't mean Garrett was foolish or reckless or brave. It just means he was human, and people don't like that because it's messier than myth. Back in their office, Rossi couldn't let go of one final curiosity. It had to do with the last night Dela was alive. They had her sleeping bag, her gear, even remnants of her last meal. No final journal entries. No voice recording. No note. She'd been alone up there, possibly for a day. Or more. The human instinct is to say something when you think it might be the end. A message. A goodbye. And yet, there was nothing. The dry bag recovered from the ledge had been water damaged but salvageable. No writing materials inside. No phone. No pen. Just the bare essentials. But that didn't mean she hadn't tried. Rossi returned to the evidence. Technician who had cataloged the items? Was anything burned? She asked, like a paper fragment. The tech blinked. Not in the bag. The portaledge fabric was scorched in one small area. Rossi straightened. Scorched. He nodded. We assumed UV degradation, maybe chemical reaction. But yeah, one spot had signs of fire exposure. Can I see it? He retrieved the recovered swatch already archived. A section of the portaledge floor, about the size of a dish towel, with a faded orange stain at the center. Along the edges, fine ash residue, fibers warped by intense contained heat. Rossi stared at it. Dela had lit something. Paper. A signal. A journal page? Or perhaps she had tried to send a message the only way she could. Smoke. She called Dr. Eris Thorne the next morning. I want a reanalysis on Dela's hands, she said. Too late for prints, he replied. We already checked for defensive wounds. Rope burn, frostbite, I know. But were there any signs of burns? Silence. Not noted, he said after a pause. But I can check again. What? 2 days later, he called her back. You were right, he said, voice tense. The distal pads of her right fingers had traced burns. First degree, consistent with brief flame exposure, probably from a lighter or match. No soot deeper in the nail beds, though, which means it wasn't prolonged. One brief flare. Rossi leaned forward over her desk, so she lit something. Yes. Thorne hesitated. Impossible. To know. But it was recent before death. Could have been for heat. Or a signal. Or a goodbye, Rossi finished. She sat back in her chair. In the end, maybe Dela had known that Garrett wasn't coming back. That the mountain had swallowed him the way it eventually swallowed her. And maybe, knowing that she had burned, the one piece of writing she couldn't let the wind take. Her last words, her last hope, gone in a whisper of smoke on the stone air. The documentary launched. 6 months later, Elliot Green released it online in segments, titled Above the Silence. It opened not with narration, but with ambient mountain wind. A shot of the Hooker Massif, its granite wall washed in morning gold. Then a slow zoom into a grainy still photo, the recovered portaledge, flapping like a memory against the cliff face. Rossi watched alone. Marianne did not. I've already lived it, she told Elliot during a final interview. I don't need to watch it again, but she allowed him to include a single clip of her speaking. Her voice steady. Everyone talks about the moment they were found. But the truth is, they never left. Not really. Not from me. Not from that mountain. In 2025. The U.S. Forest Service installed a new plaque near the Big Sandy trailhead. It wasn't a monument, just a brushed steel rectangle set into a boulder, halfway between the parking lot and the footpath that led to the Wind River Range. The inscription read, In memory of Garrett and Dela Beckwith, 2 climbers lost to the silence. Found through love, and the strength of those who refuse to stop searching. Never underestimate the mountain. Never forget what you carry in. Detective Rossi visited once. Only once. She hiked alone. Without her badge, her files, or even her notebook. Just a small pack and a laminated map. No GPS, no satellite phone. She reached the overlook by dusk and sat on a flat rock, staring across the ridgeline where the Beckwith portaledge had once clung to the sky. She thought about Garrett, meticulous, proud, human, and Dela, bold, loyal. Unknowingly caught in her father's philosophy, they had trusted the wilderness, and the wilderness had kept them for a time now. Their story was no longer a mystery, it was a memory, and that in the end was the better truth. The Wind River Range does not forget, doesn't grieve, doesn't celebrate, but it remembers not in photographs or journals or search grids, but in the erosion of stone, in the way snow drifts over old scars, and in the silence that seeps back into every ridge once the shouting stops. By spring 2026, the Beckwith mystery had receded from national attention. The documentary had finished its cycle. The forums had gone quiet. For most people, the story had ended. Father and daughter vanished in 2013. Found in pieces across cliff and basin more than a decade later. But for 3 people, it hadn't ended at all. The first was Marianne Beckwith, who had started walking again. Not in the symbolic sense, in the literal one. Each morning, she laced up hiking boots and followed a river trail behind her neighborhood. 3-mile loop through cottonwoods and sagebrush. Far from the vertical wilderness that had taken her family, but still close enough to hear the wind talk when it wanted to. She'd stopped dreaming about the portaledge. But sometimes, in that moment between sleep and waking, she could still feel Dela's hair under her hand. The warm scent of pine and trail dust. A few of Garrett's old climbing journals sat now on her nightstand. She'd begun reading them, slowly, 1 page at a time. The second was Detective Isabella Rossi, who had stayed with the sheriff's department but no longer worked cold cases. Not after Beckwith. She now headed a new division, Lost Person Behavioral Analysis. A partnership with regional SAR teams designed to preempt tragedies before they happened. Using GPS data, route pattern recognition, and gear audits, they aim to identify warning signs and missing hiker reports within hours of a call. She carried a small token in her desk drawer. A sliver of red sleeping bag fabric from Dela's portaledge. Not morbid, it's just a reminder. She never let a trail go cold again. And the third person was someone no one had noticed. Not in 2013, not in 2016, not even when. Dela's body was found. His name was Ian Merrow, and he had walked away from Mount Hooker. The same day, the Beckwiths hiked in. At the time, he was 26, a solo climber. Introverted, serious, brilliant at gear engineering and improvisation. He'd taken a sabbatical from his job at a small outdoor equipment startup in Idaho to get perspective. As he told his coworkers, he didn't own a satellite phone, didn't believe in them, too fragile, too traceable. In his trip journal, a battered write-in-a-rain notebook now archived in a box at the University of Wyoming, he wrote, Hooker East Face, unclimbed chute. 1 clean line, 1 week max. No comes, no ropes. Pure alpine silence. He never summited. But he did make camp just 1,000 feet below where Garrett and Dela established their ledge. He never saw them, or at least, that's what he told himself for years. It wasn't until late 2026 that a climbing blogger, researching lesser-known ascents in the Wind River Range, discovered Ian's name. She was building an interactive map of backcountry routes attempted. Between 2010 and 2020, cross-referencing trip reports, local guide logs, even obscure Reddit threads, she didn't mean to find anything. But she did. A dated GPS track. Uploaded anonymously to a no-defunct climbing forum in 2014, matched coordinates near the Beckwith portaledge. A private track, unremarked, labeled only East Hooker Bivvy aborted. The blog post that followed was short. Could this be the closest anyone ever came to the Beckwiths without realizing it? A 2013 GPS track, uploaded under the initials IM, shows a solo climber camping on a subshelf just below where Dela was later found. The date: the exact night before the storm rolled in. The post went viral in mountaineering circles. Rossi saw it 3 days later. She pulled the Beckwith file again. The GPS location from the blog was 280 feet beneath the ledge. A direct visual line may have been obstructed, but sound, light, smoke. She remembered Dela's scorched sleeping bag. The brief burn mark on the portal edge was a match or lighter she must have used to signal someone. Maybe not for help, but for acknowledgement. Maybe she'd seen something below, a flicker of light, a figure, and tried to make herself seen. Rossi tracked down Ian Merrow. 2 weeks later, he was living in Missoula, teaching outdoor survival at a small vocational college. Still climbing, still quiet. When she called, he agreed to meet. Barely spoke. On the phone, just gave her an address and said, "Come." She found him in a small cabin in the hills, sparse furnishings. Old climbing posters yellowed at the edges. His hair was longer now, tied back. But his eyes were sharp, restless. He answered the door barefoot. "I figured someone would come eventually," he said. Inside, the room was warm. A small fireplace crackled. No decorations, just gear. Books, silence. "I didn't see them," Ian said, before she could ask. "I swear I didn't know." Rossi sat across from him. "But you were near." He nodded once. "I was camped under an alcove, out of the wind. No elevation gain that day. My gear was soaked. I was inside my bivy sack most of the night." "Waited. I saw a light once," he added. "Thought it was a reflection. Maybe stars. Didn't investigate. Thought I was alone up there." She looked at him hard. "You weren't." He stared into the fire. "I know that now." A long silence passed. Then he stood, opened a drawer, and handed her a Ziploc bag. Inside was a water-damaged trail note, creased and half-faded. A ripped notebook page with 3 lines scribbled in pencil: "Wind rising, smoke to the left." Not from me. He hadn't shared it with anyone. Not even himself. Rossi held it like an ember. She never told Marianne. Some things, even truths, don't soothe. They just ache. But she filed the note in the Beckwith addendum, marked "Late witness. Proximity confirmed. No contact made." It didn't change the ending, but it added one more echo. Someone had been close. Close enough to save her? Maybe close enough to see her. Almost certainly. And maybe in that final hour, Dela had known that someone was there, that she hadn't. It's been invisible, that her fire had been seen. In spring 2027, a new climbing route was documented by Chloe, Vance and Ben Carter, the same pair who had found Dela's portal edge. They named it the Red Line. It traced an indirect but brutal path across the eastern face of Mount Hooker through the exposed saddle, along the granite corridor where Ian had camped, and up to a natural ledge just beneath where Dela had waited. They didn't touch the ledge, but they left a single carabiner clipped to an old bolt below it, engraved with one word: seen. Wind doesn't leave footprints. It carries only echoes, and on Mount Hooker's east face, in the crevices and chutes and wind-carved ledges, the echoes stayed longer than most memories ever dared to. In early summer 2027, 5 climbers from Boulder attempted the Red Line. It had been 6 weeks since Chloe Vance and Ben Carter's ascent, and already word had spread. A grueling, quiet climb, technically demanding, emotionally heavier than most alpine lines. It offered no summit glory, only a harsh intimacy with a place now mythic. They made the approach in 3 days, but on the 4th day, just beneath the overhang where Dela Beckwith's portal edge had once hung, the lead climber, a woman named Harper Lynn, noticed something strange. At first, she thought it was a trick of light, a shimmer against the granite. But as she moved closer, she saw it was real, a piece of white nylon ribbon fluttering gently, knotted to a rusted anchor bolt, as if someone had been there after Chloe and Ben. She unclipped it, examined it. Handwriting on the fabric, in permanent marker, smudged by wind and sun. One fire was enough. No name, no date, no explanation. She pocketed it and continued the climb. Later, She wouldn't say anything to the others. Not until they got back. Not until they stood again on flat ground and the hum of normal life came. Back like a dull drum beat. Then she told the ranger at the trailhead, quietly, just in case it meant something. By the time it reached Detective Isabella Rossi, the note had already been forwarded twice to a forest liaison officer, then to the Beckwith investigation archive assistant. It landed on Rossi's desk with no fanfare. She stared at it for 10 minutes. Then she called. Marianne, Marianne. Listened to the words over the phone. Didn't respond at first. Then, are you asking if I wrote it? No, Rossi said. I'm not. Pause. Because I didn't, Marianne said. I know. They sat in silence for a moment. The kind of silence that comes after long. Familiarity with absence? Then Marianne asked something Rossi didn't expect. Do you think people will stop going up there now? Rossi hesitated. No, probably not. I didn't think so, Marianne said. Neither would Garrett. That same week, a package arrived at the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. No return address. No postmark. Just a padded envelope with Rossi's name written in tight block letters. Inside was a small gray notebook, a trail journal weathered. Water-stained but still intact. Taped to the cover, a note. I found this buried under a cairn south of Dead Elk Basin. No markings? Thought it might matter? H. Rossi opened the first page and froze. The handwriting was Dela's. It wasn't her usual rounded script, it was tighter. Faster. Kind of writing someone uses when they're cold, tired, and afraid of forgetting something important. The entries weren't dated. They were clearly written over several days. There were 5 entries in total. Entry 1, camped above chute. Dad checking gear. Clear night. I'm scared, but trying not to show it. My fingers won't stop shaking when I think about the wall. He says I'm ready. I want to believe him. I have to. Entry 2. We made the push. The route's worse than we thought. Overhung. Shards of granite like razors. Took a fall minor. Dad caught me. We bivvy tonight. He says we'll try the ledge traverse in the morning. I'm so tired. Everything aches, but I feel alive. Entry 3. Something happened. Slipped again. Not minor. I can't. Move it. Dad says it's fractured, but I can't look. He's calm. Too calm. Says he'll make camp and get help tomorrow. I told him not to go. He kissed my forehead. I didn't cry until he was gone. Entry 4. No birds today. I heard something below. Yelled. No answer. Burned a tag from my pack. Tried to make smoke. Wind took it. No food left. I'm afraid I won't be brave when it matters. But maybe. This isn't about bravery. Maybe it's about staying human. Entry 5 last. The sun was red this morning. I think it's Thursday. I still have Dad's scent in the bag. I'm not cold. Not anymore. I hope he made it. I hope someone reads this. Please tell him I stayed. I stayed. Rossi sat at her desk for a long time after that. Then she folded the journal, placed it into an evidence sleeve, and wrote on the label, Dela Beckwith. Final entries. Received 2027. Location, unknown. She never told the press. Marianne was shown a scanned copy. She wept. Not loudly, not bitterly, just long. Then she closed the file and said, she didn't die alone. Later that year, in the Lander Public Library, a new display was installed in the local history wing. No exhibit lights, no dramatic title, just a simple glass case with 3 items. A climbing nut, retrieved from a creek, a titanium jaw plate, a notebook open to one final line. I stayed. A small plaque beneath it read, in honor of Dela and Garrett Beckwith. They climbed together. They endured alone. They are remembered always. Far above that display, the Wind River Range stretched across the map, silent and jagged, and high on Mount Hooker. Beneath a rusting bolt and a smear of faded chalk, the stone still held the imprint of 2 lives. Not ghosts, just a father and daughter, seen, heard, stayed. In the fall of 2027, the Wind River Range grew quiet again. The first snows came early, a thin powder dusting the granite and filling the crevices where, just months earlier, climbers had traced new routes and left tokens behind. By October, the eastern face of Mount Hooker had emptied. No more summits. No flags. No cameras, only wind and silence. And one final mystery still quietly echoing beneath it all. Because someone, no one knew, who had left the trail journal. Under that cairn, the entries had been written by Dela. That much was now certain. The handwriting, the details, the emotional fingerprint across every word, unmistakable. But the notebook had been found miles away from the ledge, south of Dead Elk Basin, down the slope. Across fractured rock, impossible to explain unless someone had moved it. Detective Bella Rossi stared at the map. She had pinned every known GPS coordinate related to the case. The truck, the cliff, the recovered gear, the spot where Dela's body was found, the basin where Garrett's jaw plate had surfaced. Now this, a point south, off-trail, remote, where a stranger had claimed to find the journal under a cairn with no name attached. It didn't make sense. Dela had been immobile, her legs shattered. She hadn't crawled down that basin, so who had moved the journal? Rossi drove to Laramie the next day to speak with an archivist named Morgan Teal, a quiet woman who managed the outdoor records collection at the University of Wyoming. Morgan had cataloged hundreds of trail journals over the years, from casual hikers to expert climbers. When Rossi showed her the Beckwith entries, Morgan didn't flinch. But she leaned in closer. "I don't think she buried it," she said. "Why?" Morgan tapped a corner of the paper. "See the edges? Clean, not torn. And the water damage is inconsistent. It gets pooled, not spread. Like it sat still for a long time in a container, probably waterproofed, a dry bag." Morgan nodded. "Maybe even placed intentionally. The ink hasn't run. The graphite hasn't smudged. Someone preserved this." Rossi stared at the notebook again. Someone had found it, protected it, and buried it for someone else to find. Why? That night, she went back through the call logs from the station. The ones from the first wave of the search, all the way back in 2013. Among the notes, she found a name. R. Croft. Unverified sighting. Possible Hooker climber. August 14, 13. The note was vague. A ranger named Tim Ellison had mentioned in passing that a man had been seen descending the eastern ridge. Near the end of August, days after Garrett and Dela were presumed dead. No follow-up, no contact, just a name. Rossi blinked. She'd never seen the name again in the case file. She typed it into the search database. Richard Croft. No climbing permits under that name. No summit logs. No missing persons report, nothing. But then a breakthrough. The local gear shop in Pinedale had a signed waiver from 2013. A man named R. Croft had rented crampons and a bivvy, SCAC, on August 7th. He paid cash. No ID required. The equipment was never returned. Rossi dug deeper. A cabin rental under the same name. Just outside of Farson for a week. Same time frame. It's paid in full, left early. The property had since been sold, but the old record showed a forwarding address. Boise, Idaho. She called the Idaho State Police. Then she waited. 3 days later, they got back to her. "There's no Richard Croft registered anywhere in state," the officer said. "But the address that belongs to a guy named Paul Mercer. Lives alone. Minimal digital footprint. Former wilderness guide. Tired." Rossi hung up and booked a flight. Boise was gray and overcast when she arrived. The address led to a brick duplex on a quiet residential street. Single Subaru in the driveway. Cracked stone birdbath near the porch. She knocked. The man who opened the door was older, late 60s, thin, with a weathered face and alert eyes. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask why she was there. He just said, "You're from Wyoming." Rossi nodded. "Fremont County. Sheriff's Office." Stepped aside without protest. "I've been expecting you."
I'll be back.
They sat in the kitchen. No pretense. No coffee. Paul Mercer folded his hands. I went in under a false name, he said. I shouldn't have. But I wasn't supposed to be guiding anymore. I was burned out and curious. About what? He looked her straight in the eye. About why no one ever made it back from that face. Rossi let that settle. I saw. The girl, he said quietly. August 11th. High Ridge. I thought she was sleeping, but when I got closer, stopped. She was gone. He swallowed. I didn't touch her. I didn't move her. But I saw a small dry bag tucked against the rock, like she'd placed it under an overhang, out of the sun. He glanced at Rossi again. I opened it. There was a journal. I read one page, then zipped it shut. Why didn't you report it? Panicked, he said. I'd used a fake name, rented gear under a lie. I was afraid they'd charge me. Think I stole something, or worse. So you left her. I didn't just leave, he said. I buried the journal, south of Dead Elk Basin, under a marker. I wanted someone to find it. I just didn't want it to be me. Rossi's hands were tight on her knees. You could have ended the search. He nodded. I know. His voice was hoarse now. I carry it every day. She didn't arrest him. There was no crime left to charge, but she made him write a statement, sign it, date it, and she added it to the Beckwith file. One more broken thread, finally tied off. The official case was updated for the last time in November 2027. Final addendum. Notes: Journal was preserved and relocated by unregistered witness Paul Mercer. Identity verified through cabin and gear rental records. Witness confirms the location of Dela Beckwith as early as the 11th of August 2013. No emergency report filed. No attempt to retrieve remains. Witness later buried the journal under cairn. Notebook recovered 2027. Status: Final account reconciled. No further investigation warranted. Detective Isabella Rossi, Marianne Beckwith, never read the addendum. She declined gently, without bitterness. I have the journal, she said. That's all I ever needed. That winter she published a memoir. It wasn't a grief memoir. Not exactly. It was about roots, the invisible ones, between people, between choices. Between the places we come from and the ones we disappear into. She called it Wind Without Footprints. The dedication was simple. For Garrett and Dela, I followed. I found you. I stayed in the high places of the Wind River Range. The cairn that once hid Dela's journal still stands. The notebook is gone, but someone, maybe a stranger, maybe someone who once climbed the same ledges, added something in its place. A small piece of slate, etched with a nail. Scratched and crude, but legible. No one is truly lost if someone remembers where they were. In the spring of 2028, the ice began to melt earlier than expected. It was a warm season, even for the Wind River Range. Park rangers reported increased runoff through the cirques and ravines, exposing ground usually hidden well into June. 1. Hiker out ahead of the season's first wave spotted something strange beneath a thinning snowpack on the west slope. A sun-bleached strip of nylon webbing tied around a protruding root. The location was nowhere near the final known position of either Garrett or Dela Beckwith. It was 3 miles west, near an old drainage line, far off any route they were believed to have taken. The ranger who responded called it in as a routine gear remnant. But when Isabella Rossi saw the GPS coordinates, her stomach dropped. She knew that slope. It had been dismissed early in the original search, its effort due to dangerous terrain and a complete lack of footpaths. But Garrett had been a minimalist. And now they knew he had planned a different route. A descent most wouldn't dare. She got in her car and drove. The site was difficult to reach, even in good weather, but Rossi hiked alone. 2 hours of slow movement brought her to the flagged spot. Snowmelt was running in narrow ribbons down the hill. Moss clung to the stone, slick and emerald. The nylon strap fluttered like a ribbon from a forgotten gift. She crouched and touched it, torn, stiff, dyed. A pale red, she followed its line, and saw it led to a small rock alcove just beyond a cluster of bent pines. Inside, the air smelled faintly of decay and dust, and beneath the ledge, partially buried in loam and leaves, was a canvas pack, weathered, half-eaten by time, still intact. She dug it out slowly. Inside, a stainless steel thermos, a first aid kit encompassed a laminated map, and, at the bottom, sealed letter in a Ziploc bag. The name on the envelope was printed in blocky handwriting. Marianne. She didn't open it, not yet. She called the county, logged a find, and personally drove the bag to the evidence room then. After 2 hours of paperwork and a long shower she barely remembered taking, Rossi called Marianne Beckwith. Marianne sat across from her 2 days later in the same office where she had once begged for answers. She held the envelope in both hands. Trembling, Rossi waited silently as she slid one finger under the flap and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was Garrett's. Marianne, if you're reading this, I didn't make it back. If I didn't, it means I failed both of you. I can't begin to describe the ache I feel leaving her. Leaving Dela. She told me to go. Told me not to turn back, even when she was shaking. Even when she was in pain, she was brave in a way I don't understand. I took a shortcut, a route I knew from years ago. Thought I could outpace the weather. Thought I could reach a ranger station, but the storm closed in fast. I'm sheltering now, hoping it breaks. If I don't make it, tell her. Tell her I tried. I left the phones in the truck. You know why? I wanted this to be different. Wanted her to feel the real wild, not the version with digital tethers and emergency redundancies. But I see now, I dragged her into a philosophy, not a plan. If this letter makes it to you, it's because someone found what I couldn't finish. I love you. I love you both. Please forgive me. Marianne folded the letter with both hands, her face unreadable. She didn't cry. She sat back in the chair, breathing in and out as if relearning how. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. He meant for this to matter. Rossi nodded. It does. That summer, Marianne hiked again. Not the flat riverside trail, not the 3-mile neighborhood loops. She hiked Mount Hooker with Chloe and Ben. With wind in her hair and silence in her pockets, she made it halfway up the red line. Before turning back, she didn't need to reach the ledge. She just needed to feel the stone beneath her hands. She scattered half the letter's ashes at the overlook that faced the basin. The other half she kept, framed, quiet, hung above her fireplace with no caption. In August, the county erected a new trail marker. It wasn't a warning, not a caution sign. It's just a reminder. It stood at the entrance to the approach path, the first turnoff most climbers missed. Etched into metal, Garrett and Dela Beckwith attempted the east face in 2013. They were last seen near this ridgeline, found years later because no one stopped looking. Wilderness does not forget. Neither should we. In the very last known photograph of Dela, she's laughing. Taken by Garrett from a low angle, her face is tilted skyward, her climbing helmet off, hair pulled back in a rough ponytail. She's sitting on a stone. The sun behind her, that image now hangs in the Lander SAR headquarters above it. Someone posted a small laminated note. Don't just pack the map. Learn the terrain. Know the cost. Love anyway. By the end of 2028, the Beckwith file had grown to over 3,000 pages. But Rossi closed it with 2 final words typed on the last page. Case concluded. The mountain remained unaffected, but no longer silent. Winter returned to the Wind River Range in full force by early 2029. The high country was buried in snow, and the eastern face of Mount Hooker vanished beneath ice and cloud. What had been visible, the scarred ledges, the rusted bolts, the roots whispered among climbers, was buried again. Not erased, but softened. The story of Garrett and Dela Beckwith had taken on a life of its own, passed between hikers and ranger stations. Repeated on blogs, adapted in quiet podcasts and backcountry forums. A father and daughter, lost, found, remembered, but the final chapter didn't. Belonged to the mountain. It belonged to the people they left behind. Marianne Beckwith sat at her kitchen table in Lander and stared at a yellow envelope that had arrived without warning. No return address inside. Was a USB drive. Labeled only, Redline Descent -2028. She plugged it into her laptop. The file was a single video, It began with drone footage. High above the east face, wind screaming through the speakers. The camera dipped, then glided along the rock face where Dela's portaledge had once hung. There, clearly visible, was the small red bolt where Chloe Vance had left the engraved carabiner. Then the footage changed. Helmet cam. Someone descending the red line carefully, methodically. The route was narrow, the ledges brittle with frost. No narration, no music, just breath and wind, and the occasional quiet okay muttered under strain. The climber stopped at a small shelf. There, in full frame, was the cairn, the same one from 2027, where Dela's notebook had been found. But this time, it had changed. A new rock was balanced at the top, smoother, polished by hand, and on it, scrawled in black marker, "For those who stayed." The climber held the shot for nearly a minute, then turned the camera to their own face. It was Ian Merrow, the man who had once camped below Dela, unaware of how close he'd been. The man who had stayed silent for years, then confessed to seeing smoke.
Yeah.
To thinking someone had been near, but who had never known until he did. Marianne watched the entire video twice. Then, without saying anything to anyone, she called the director of the Lander Public Library and requested the footage be added to the Beckwith Memorial Archive. She wrote a note to be placed with it. Asterisk, he came back. He looked. That's all Dela ever needed. Asterisk elsewhere, Detective Isabella Rossi was cleaning out her desk. She had given notice that spring, not out of burnout, not out of loss, but because some stories are full stops, not commas. The Beckwith case had taught her more about love, failure, perseverance than a dozen years in homicide ever had. She didn't want to chase ghosts anymore. She wanted to stop them from forming. She was leaving to lead a wilderness safety initiative in partnership with the National Park Service. It's an education and intervention team that would deploy when hikers went off-grid or when early warning signs surfaced. Her badge sat in a felt box next to it. A photograph of Dela, and next to that, the charred corner of the sleeping bag, preserved in acrylic under a brass tag that read, "She lit the signal. We just didn't see it in time." In early May, before the thaw, Marianne hiked back to the overlook with Ben Carter, just the two of them. They didn't go to the portaledge site. They didn't try to reach the ridge or recreate the path. They just stood where the air felt thinner and the valley looked infinite. She scattered the last of Garrett's letter there. The ashes fluttered, caught in the updraft, and vanished into the pale blue sky. Ben handed her a second object, a weatherproof time capsule. No larger than a fist inside, she placed. A copy of Dela's trail journal, the envelope Garrett addressed to her a photograph of the three of them. From when Dela was a toddler, they buried it beneath the cairn, not for discovery, for peace, by the summer solstice. A few new names had joined the Red Line registry. None had climbed to be part of the story. But each had left a note in the weatherproof journal stashed at the base of the route. Saw the cairn, felt them there, carried her words up with me. Thank you, Dela. You changed how I climb, how I prepare. It's how I come back. And in a classroom in Boise, Paul Mercer, once the unknown witness who buried Dela's notebook, began teaching again. Not formal classes, just seminars, quiet sessions for wilderness volunteers. He called them First Sight, not Search. And rescued just the art of paying attention. He opened each session with a line he said came from a journal long gone. If you think you're alone, light the fire anyway. In September 2029, a bronze plaque was mounted on the new visitor kiosk at Big Sandy Trailhead. The text was short. In memory of Garrett and Dela Beckwith, vanished August 2013, found, remembered, loved. No one is truly lost if someone remembers. Where they were? By then, the echoes had become something else. Not just memory, but legacy. Not just loss, but instruction. And as the wind moved once again over the empty rock face of Mount Hooker, it did not howl with grief. It whispered something. Quieter. Something steadier, it whispered. They stayed. We found them. We remember.